The Hearthside Chronicles, Book 3, The House That Borrowed the Rain. Chapter 4. The Fourth Chair. Edwin woke in the small hours without knowing what had woken him. The room was entirely black, and the rain had changed while he slept. It was no longer the hard, insistent rain that had walked him across the moor. It had softened into something slower and more considering, a rain that seemed to be going over things rather than saying them. He lay still and listened, and had very nearly talked himself back into sleep when the sound came again. It was not a knock, or not quite. It was too slow for a knock. 3 separate touches against wood, far enough apart that whoever was making them might have changed their mind twice in between. He struck a match, lit the candle on the washstand, and sat on the edge of the bed with his bare feet on cold boards, waiting to learn whether anyone else in the house had heard it. Below him a door opened. Somebody crossed a floor without hurrying. Edwin put his coat on over his shirt, which felt ridiculous, and went down regardless. The staircase turned twice on its way, as it had on the way up, and the candle threw his shadow along the wall ahead of him, so that he had the impression of following himself down. Isaac's door was shut as he passed it, and there was no sound behind it. Martha was in the kitchen with the lamp lit and the kettle already sitting on the range. She was fully dressed. Her hair was pinned as neatly as it had been at supper, and there was not a crease of sleep anywhere about her, and Edwin decided in that moment that there were a number of questions he was not going to ask that night, and that this would be the first of them. On the table stood a single cup and saucer, set out on their own, with the milk jug beside them. "You heard it," she said. "I heard something. I would not swear it was a knock." It was not quite. She has been out there a good while deciding. Deciding what? Whether she is the sort of woman who knocks on strange doors at 1 in the morning. Martha lifted the kettle off the heat before it could get as far as whistling, and filled the pot. "She has decided she is not," she said. "So we shall have to go and fetch her in." The hall was colder than the kitchen. Bracken had come off the parlour rug and was standing at the front door with his ears forward and his tail going slowly, which Edwin took to mean that whatever waited outside was no cause for alarm. The clock said 20 minutes to 1. Martha drew the bolt and opened the door, and the rain came in only as sound. A woman stood on the step. She was tall and older than Martha, or looked it, with a face that had spent a great many years out in weather and had come to an understanding with it. She wore a man's overcoat that had plainly belonged to a larger man, and carried a storm lantern that had gone out, and she was soaked through from the knees down and perfectly dry from the knees up. Edwin looked at the stone beneath her boots. Dry, as it had been for him, and for Alfie, and for Isaac. The rain fell into the dark on either side of the doorway, and did not fall on the step at all. "You will be Constance," Martha said. "I will be," said the woman, "though I should like to know how you come to know it, since I have not stood at this door in 51 years. Come in out of the wet part of it, and I will tell you what I can, which will not be a great deal." Constance Ray stepped over the threshold and stood dripping in the hall, looking about her with an expression Edwin could not read at all. "The clock," she said, "still going." It was going then. It has gone on going. And the photograph of the dog by the stairs. That is a different dog. It is the same photograph. It is, Martha agreed, and took the dead lantern out of her hand without being offered it, and set it on the hall table as casually as a hat. Constance stood a moment longer. Whatever she had come out onto the moor prepared to find, Edwin thought, this had not been it, and she was taking a little time to assemble herself around it. Then she said, in a much shorter voice, "I am looking for my niece. She is asleep in the second chair from the fire," said Martha, "with her boots off and her dog across her feet. She has had a bowl of stew and cried about 11 tears, which I judge to be the right number, and there is a bed made up for her that she has not yet troubled to get into." Constance did not answer that straight away. When she did, all she said was, "Thank you." They went through to the parlour. The fire had been banked, but not let out, and Martha knelt and woke it with 2 pieces of wood and no visible effort, and the room came back around them by degrees. Rose was exactly where Martha had said she would be. The terrier raised his head, considered the newcomer, then got up and crossed the rug to her with his whole back half swinging and leaned hard against her wet shins. That woke Rose. She sat up too quickly, saw her aunt standing in a strange parlour in a coat 3 sizes too large for her, and said, "Oh." "Yes," said Constance, "I could not find the lane." "There is no shame in that. I have lived here 40 years, and I could not find the lane tonight either, and I set off towards it in a straight line from my own gate. I am sorry." "You are not to be sorry. You are to sit down, because I have walked a very long way in order to be cross with you, and I find I cannot manage it standing up." She sat, and Rose sat, and after a moment Rose leaned sideways and put her head against her aunt's shoulder, and the older woman's hand came up and rested on her hair, and neither of them said anything at all about it. Edwin discovered that the fire required his full attention. Martha brought the tea through, and the cup that had been standing alone on the kitchen table turned out to be exactly the right size for the hand it was given to. 51 years, Constance said at last. "Yes, I was 19. I was walking over to my sister's, and there was weather, and there was a light where no light had any business being. There generally is. There was a woman at this door who gave me stew and put me in the 3rd room along the landing and told me the house was not finished yet." Martha said nothing. "You have not changed," Constance said. "Not by a day, not by an hour." "No. Are you going to explain it?" "I am not able to. I have tried once or twice with people I was fond of, and I have never got beyond about the 3rd sentence before it stops being true." Constance took this rather as a farmer takes a forecast. "Then I shall not press you," she said, "but I will say this much. I went home the next morning, and my sister asked me where I had been, and I told her, and she did not believe one word of it, and I never told another living soul. And I have thought about this house perhaps once a week for 51 years. I know. How? Because the house has been thinking about you, Martha said. That is why the light was burning tonight, and why it was burning for the girl, and why neither of you was ever going to find that lane. A board shifted overhead, and Isaac came down in his shirt sleeves and stopped on the bottom step, and took in the 4 people in the parlour and the fire built back up, and nodded once, as though a small private wager had gone the way he had expected. "The 4th?" he said. "The 4th," Martha agreed. "Then we are all here." "We are." Alfie arrived in the doorway not long after, with his hair standing up on one side and no visible curiosity about any of it. Observed that if tea was being made at 1 in the morning, he would like it. Noted that he had been the last man in the house to hear about it. Sat down in the chair nearest the door, and was asleep again, inside 10 minutes. Edwin stayed awake a while longer. He watched Rose fall asleep against her aunt's shoulder. He watched Constance look into the fire with the expression of a woman who had waited half a century for something and had just discovered she was in no hurry to reach the end of it. He watched Isaac take a small notebook from his pocket, write 2 lines in it, and put it away again. And somewhere in the middle of all that, out in the hall, the clock began to strike. Edwin counted. It struck 1 and stopped. 1 was the hour. It was the plainest and least remarkable thing the house had done since he came to it, and he found that it moved him more than everything else put together. Martha heard it too and set down her cup. "There," she said quietly. "It has said what it had to say." "And the house?" Edwin asked. "Is it finished now?" Martha looked at the 4 of them, and at the 2 dogs, and at the fire she had brought back out of almost nothing. "Nearly," she said. Then she took up the poker and settled the coals for the last time that night, and told them all to go to bed, and every one of them went, and the rain carried on thinking things over outside until morning. Chapter 5. The names inside the clock. Edwin woke to silence, and lay for some time trying to work out what was wrong with it. It took him longer than it should have done. The rain had stopped. That was all. After a day and a night of it, the absence of rain had the quality of a held breath, and the room felt larger for it, and the light coming around the edge of the curtain was the pale, scrubbed light of a morning that intends to be fine and has not entirely made up its mind. He got up and went to the window. The moor was there, as he had expected, brown and green and running with water in 100 small threads that had not existed the day before. What he had not expected was the orchard. It lay perhaps a 1/4 of a mile off, down the slope and to the left, 40 or 50 trees in rough rows, the grass beneath them long and silvered with wet, and a low stone wall going round 3 sides of it and simply stopping on the 4th, as though whoever built it had been called away and never come back. He had walked across that ground yesterday. He was almost certain of it. He had walked across it in failing light with his collar up and his hat pulled down, and there had been nothing on it but heather and stone, and one dead tree lying on its side like a shipwreck. He looked at the orchard for a while. Then he got dressed because it was cold and because he had discovered over the past 12 hours that the house tended to answer questions rather better when you stopped asking them. The kitchen smelled of bacon and wood smoke and wet dog. Alfie was at the table with his sleeves rolled, working through a plate of eggs with the concentration of a man who has 30 miles ahead of him. Isaac stood at the window with a cup in both hands. Bracken lay across the doorway in the exact position most inconvenient to everybody, which Edwin had begun to suspect was a matter of policy. "There he is," said Alfie, "the last man down, and him a guest of only one night, which shows a promising lack of ceremony." "I slept extremely well," Edwin said, and found as he said it that it was true, and that he could not remember the last time he had been able to say it. "Everyone does," said Isaac. "It is the one thing about this house that nobody argues with." Martha put a plate in front of Edwin without asking whether he wanted one. "There is an orchard," he said. "There is?" "There was not an orchard yesterday." "No," Martha agreed. Alfie pointed at him with a fork. "You are getting the hang of it," he said. "2 days ago, you would have argued about that for an hour. Now, look at you, eating your breakfast like a sensible man. I intend to argue about it later. I am only waiting until I have had some tea." "That is all any of us do," said Isaac. Rose came down not long after, with her hair pushed back and her boots dry and stiff from the range, and behind her came Constance, who had slept by her own account better than she had any right to and worse than she had wanted to, on the grounds that she had not wished to waste the night in being unconscious. "You have an orchard out there," Constance said to Martha before she had even sat down. "I have. It is my orchard. It is very like it. It is my orchard. That is my wall, and that is where my wall stops, and there is the tree my father put in the wrong place and would not have moved." "Then you had better go and look at it after breakfast," said Martha, "and tell me what you find, because I have never once been able to get down there, and I have been trying for a considerable time." Constance stared at her. "You have never been able to get to it." "It is not for me," Martha said, and put the teapot down in the middle of the table with an air of finality. And that was the end of the discussion for the length of one breakfast. Afterwards, while the others gathered coats, Edwin went out into the hall. He had told himself he was looking at the photographs, and to begin with he was. They ran up the wall beside the stairs in no order at all, in frames of different sizes and periods, and he went along them slowly, and found what he had half expected, and had not admitted to himself that he was hunting for. A young woman on a doorstep, 19 perhaps, tall, in a coat that fitted her, holding a lantern that was lit. She was not quite smiling, and not quite not, and she was looking directly at whoever held the camera with an expression that said she had questions and would be asking them shortly. The photograph had been in that frame for a very long time. The paper had gone the colour of weak tea at the edges. "That was taken the morning after," said Constance behind him. Edwin did not jump, which surprised him. Who took it? I have no idea. There was no camera in this house. I would have sworn to it then, and I would swear to it now. She looked at her own face for a while. I was very cross that morning. I remember that much. Nobody would tell me anything, and everybody was extremely kind, and I could not decide which of the two was worse. And now? Now I am 70 years old, and I have stopped requiring things to be one or the other. She turned away from the wall. Come and look at the clock with me. The clock stood at the turn of the hall, tall and dark and plain, with a face that had been repainted at least twice by somebody with more patience than skill. Edwin had wanted to open it since the moment it struck 9. He put his hand on the case door and looked at Constance, and she nodded, and he opened it. There were the weights, and the pendulum, swinging slow and heavy, and the smell of old oil and older wood. All of it ordinary, all of it exactly what he had expected, which was, in its way, the strangest thing he had encountered since he arrived. And on the inside of the case door, from the top to the bottom, and down the sides where the wood was wide enough to take it, were names. Hundreds of them, written in pencil, most of them, some in ink, 1 or 2 scratched in with a knife point by somebody who had wanted to be certain of lasting, each with a date beside it, each in the hand of whoever had put it there, so that the whole door was a crowd of handwritings, upright and slanted and cramped and looping, going back and back. Constance found hers without looking for it. C. Ray, November 1904. She touched it with one finger and did not say anything. Edwin read what he could, names of people who had stood where he was standing and gone away again and lived their whole lives and died, and a fair number who, judging by the dates, must have been in this house when it was already old. Near the bottom, in a small round hand, one that must have belonged to a child, somebody had written Tom, and then, apparently thinking better of the informality, had added Thomas underneath it, and got the second S the wrong way round. "Is there a pencil?" Edwin said. "On the shelf inside," said Martha from the kitchen doorway, where she had evidently been standing for some while. "Where there has always been one." There was. Edwin wrote his name and the date, and found that his hand was steadier than he expected, and that the wood took the pencil the way old wood does, softly, as if it had been waiting. Then he stood back and looked at the door full of names, and understood all at once, and without anybody having to explain it, what Martha had meant about the house not being finished. "It is not a building," he said. "No," said Martha, "it is a list. That is nearer than most people get on the first morning." They left at 9, which the clock announced correctly, and which nobody remarked upon. Alfie went first because his round would not walk itself, with his bag across his shoulder and his hat at an angle that suggested a man entirely at peace with the fact that he would be soaked again by noon. He shook Edwin's hand and told him that the road to Kirkby was 3 miles and downhill, and that he could not possibly get lost, and then added after a pause that this had also been true yesterday. Isaac went next, out to a van that had been standing all night in the lee of the wall, and started on the second attempt. He left the violin. "It is not finished," he said, when Edwin pointed this out, "and it has decided what it wants to be. which it did somewhere around midnight, and I would rather it stayed here while I get used to the idea. What does it want to be? Something for this room, Isaac said. It is a poor sort of answer, and I am not going to improve on it. Martha has agreed to keep it out of the damp. Rose and Constance went down towards the orchard, the terrier casting about in wide circles ahead of them and coming back at intervals to check that they were still following. Edwin watched them go through the gap in the wall. He watched Constance stop at the first tree and put her hand flat against it, the way a person greets a horse. Then he could not see them any more, though the ground between was open and there was nothing in the way. He turned round. Martha was at the door with her arms folded against the cold, and bracken beside her, and the house behind them both, low and grey and streaming with wet, its chimney going steadily. "They will come back up," she said. "By dinner. She will be different and she will not be able to say how. Will I see them again? That is not up to me. Is anything?" Martha smiled at that, the first properly broad smile he had seen from her. "Less than you would think," she said. "I make the beds and I keep the fire in, and I put the pencil back on the shelf when somebody forgets. The rest of it does as it likes. I stopped taking it personally a very long time ago." Edwin picked up his bag. There were a dozen questions left, and he found he did not want to ask a single one of them, which was not the same as their being answered, and he suspected he would be turning that difference over for years. "Thank you," he said, "for the stew." "You are welcome for the stew, and for the rest." The rest was not mine to give. He went down the track. It ran where no track had run the previous afternoon, firm underfoot, curving between two banks of rushes towards the road, and he did not once have to look for it. At the bend he stopped and turned back, half expecting and half hoping in a way he was not proud of to find nothing behind him but open moor. The house was there, grey and solid and utterly ordinary, with the light on in the kitchen window against the morning, and smoke going up, and a woman in the doorway with a golden retriever leaning on her leg. It looked as though it had stood there for 400 years, and intended to stand there for 400 more, and Edwin found that this steadied him far more than a vanishing would have done, and unsettled him far more as well. He raised his hand. Martha raised hers. Then he walked on down to the road, 3 miles and downhill, past the place where his own car sat patiently in a ditch waiting to be dug out on some other, duller day. And he did not look back again because he already knew what he would see, and because some part of him had understood on the doorstep, without being told, that the house was not somewhere you left. It was somewhere you were added to. Behind him, in the hall, the clock ticked on over its door full of names, and the pencil lay on the shelf where it had always lain, and the fire was banked but not out. There was, after all, still one chair empty.